Okay, so we just finished setting up the trainer, but I want to have a warning. So when I turn this button on, I want to make sure that certain of these switches are in the proper position. And that's what warnings are for. So I'm going to go back up here to warnings. Okay, so we don't care about whether there's a gear or not because we don't have a gear. Okay. Here's where you get a warning if the throttle's over 10%. Now, I'm actually going to change that to throttle over 20%. Okay, so 20% is not much. I think 20% is okay for a gas engine because it might be up a little bit. But it's only going to warn you when you turn the radio on. So 10% is good. I like 20. So on flight mode, I want it to warn me if I'm not in flight mode 1. Now notice what you see here is you see a little black square. Hopefully, let me see if I can get a little closer here. Okay. So in the flight mode, that little black square is sitting on 1. That's because the switch up here is on the lower position. So so if I flip the switch, you go to 1, 2, 3. So in flight mode 1, when I turn the radio on, I want to be in flight mode 1. Otherwise, don't come on. So that's where the white square here, right? That white square says it's okay to be in flight mode 1, but don't be in flight mode 2 or 3 because I want to take off in takeoff mode. Okay. That's the first warning. Okay. Now, we don't have flaps, so you can assign warnings to channels, and this is why I use channel 3 for the trainer switch. Okay. So I'm going to say aux 3. And I want it to be under, and I can change the 0%, but under 0% is fine. Okay, so that's going to give me a warning that the trainer switch, the H switch back here, is not in the proper mode. So here's what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm going to go back to the list, go back to the top, and I'm going to turn the radio off so I can demonstrate this. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is just flip this switch here, and so it's not in launch mode, I'm in cruise mode. So now I'm going to turn it on and I'll get the warning.
Warning, cruise mode. Launch mode.
So I switched from cruise mode to launch mode, and that's all it did. So now I'm going to turn it off. And I'm going to turn switch H here up to the trainer mode. So now if I turn it on.
Student has control. Warning, servo under 0%. Instructor has control.
So you heard it say student has control, then it's going to warn me until I get that thing fixed. Okay. So that's what these warnings are. And if you have both of them in the wrong direction, you got to set them both right. So that's what the warnings do. Okay, the next setup feature is the trim setup. And I leave this default. The 5 means how many points each click of the trim means, and so you can have it to be 5 as an average. Common means that you can have different trim settings for each flight mode. I don't like that. I want no matter what the flight mode, if I change a trim, I want it to change it in all flight modes, because that's what trim should do. So trim is just default. Trim setup is just default. Model utilities, we don't need to create a new model, delete a model copy, so I don't need to do any of the model utilities. Warnings we just covered. Telemetry, I think we already did this. Remember we set up the volts and the temperature, and so that's all was set up when we did the setup of the telemetry module. So that's all been done. Now pre-flight setup is something that you can use it, you can read the manual about it, but it just forces you to do a pre-flight in a certain fashion. I've decided not to use it. Maybe I'll get to it someday, but it's not something I need. Frame rate, bind. This just puts it in bind mode versus turning it on with a bind button push down. So you can start binding from here. Okay. Trainer, we already went through. Digital switch setup. We're not going to set up any digital switches. System settings. The only system setting I change in here is the brightness of this, and when I'm normally using this, the brightness is set to 0. I've got it set to 100% now because the camera is easier to see it at 100%. So transfer SD card, we don't need to do any SD card stuff today. So that's everything in system setup.